Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the fourth Sunday of Advent. Let me share a little Christmas story for you. My birthday is near Christmas, and so a lot of my birthday gifts are somewhat Christmas related, Christmas adjacent. And one of my favorite birthday gifts that I ever got about 5 years ago, my wife gave me tickets to a certain show, a certain special performance. One of the most famous pieces of work in human history, I might say. And you'll figure it out pretty soon. So we went down to the Rebecca Cone, and we're right near the front row. These are good tickets. And sort of a hush falls over the crowd. And we wait for the first singer to come out. This is Handel's Messiah. If you've heard of Handel's Messiah, it's a piece from the 18th century written by Handel, which tells the story of the coming of the Messiah and the restoration of the world. It starts with the Old Testament prophecies, and then it comes, then you have the shepherd and Mary and Joseph making their way to Bethlehem, and the angels, and it's a beautiful thing, and at the end, all creation is made new, and it's one of the most beautiful and stirring pieces of music ever performed, and for a lot of people, it's a Christmas tradition. So I'd never gone to Handel's Messiah before, but I knew the importance, the history of it, so I was very excited to finally sit down and enjoy it. Now, Allison, I think knew very little about it. So she didn't know what to expect. And so I remember sitting there again, darkness, silence, and the first person comes out. It's a solo singer, it's a man, he's got a high and clear voice. He sings, "Comfort, comfort ye my people." And I'm just taking it all in. This is beautiful. And I look over and Allison is just losing it laughing. I said, what is so funny? And she was laughing so hard she couldn't even tell me. And I'm trying to appreciate, the music. And the person next to me is just giggling. And she told me, "Yeah, I could sing like that," she says. I said, "No, you couldn't. This is like important classical, serious music." She's like, "No, I'm pretty sure I can sound like that guy." Anyway, she sometimes does sound like that guy. But it was a funny moment, and while I was trying to take in the seriousness of it, I quickly dissolved into laughter, and for pretty much the whole 90 minutes, both of us were just losing in the front row. But that's my Handel's Messiah memory. A beautiful piece. I do recommend it. Just try not to get the laughter kind of out of there before you come in. Advent is the season we're in. And it is the pause before the orchestra plays. It's the pause before the music starts, the hushed silence. It represents the weight and the longing and the yearning of God's people for God to finally come in the person of the Messiah. And we remember that longing as we tie it into the own longing we have nowadays, to see God's hope, peace, love, and joy finally come in our present and one day in our future. This is the pregnant pause we find ourselves in. And pregnancy is a big part of the Christmas story. It's another period of waiting. Allison will say that giving birth to our son Gideon, which was the only non-C-section birth she had, it was the most joyful and empowering moment of her life. And she doesn't have words to describe what that moment is like. I certainly can't appreciate it, though I was there, but you can understand, for the mothers in the room, why Mary sings, why she's so filled with joy in this moment. The story, Mary has found out she's pregnant with an incredible son, with an incredible baby, and she visits her cousin Elizabeth, who is much older and never had a child, and you might expect there to even be some tension between them. I mean, here we have the older cousin who's wanted to be pregnant for a long time, and the younger cousin is pregnant so quickly, so early, and miraculously, and yet we don't find that tension. We find joy between the two cousins, and she sings a song, and what you might expect her to sing about is her baby and her pregnancy. And she actually sings a song that's a little surprising. Filled with joy, Mary sings about 4 things. And I encourage you, if you have a Bible in front of you, to open up to Luke chapter 1. Mary's song, perhaps the most famous song ever sung, even more famous than Handel's Messiah. She sings about, of all things, political upheaval. Political upheaval. Why would she sing about politics at a time like this? In 52, she says, He, God, has brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. She's looking back to the past at the things God has done on a political, governmental, empire level. And she sees herself in that story now. She sees her son in that story, and she sees that God will do the same. Political upheaval, systemic change. Systemic change. The world is going to be different from now on. She sings about one of the biggest Old Testament themes you can find, good news for the poor. Pretty much every sermon I've done this year comes back to this one idea, good news for the poor. We just sang O Holy Night, and I wish I had the lyrics in front of me, but what is that line about the slave is our brother? Try to think of it. Chains shall he break, for the slave is our brother. In his name, all oppression shall cease. If you really believe that this was true, that God was really doing this kind of thing, that is good news. And it's good news particularly for the poor. And if we find some of these freedom themes or this Christmas joy not resonating with us, imagine putting yourself in the shoes of the poor, of the slave, of the oppressed, of the hungry. What good news would this be? He has filled the hungry with good things, verse 53, but has sent the rich away empty. God is doing something big. God is doing something big. And it's not just that he's going to do it now, but he has always done it, and he's promised to one day do it fully. Mary sings about the gospel before the gospel. Jesus has yet to come. He has yet to bring the kingdom. He has yet to live and die and live again. But yet the gospel is right here before he even comes. In verse 54 and 55, He, God, has helped his servant Israel, remembering to be merciful to Abraham and his descendants forever, just as he promised our ancestors. This is part of a big, big story of God promising one day to bless the world. And though there have been setbacks, though there has been slavery and exile, God has not forgotten. He will one day deliver them. He will one day bring his kingdom. He will one day make all things new. This is the gospel before the gospel. And just like our Advent theme today, Mary sings about love. Now, if you try to look in her song for the word love, you might not find it, but you'll see another word, mercy. And what you have to know, this is an English text translated out of the Greek, which would have come from Hebrew or Aramaic beforehand. Certainly that would have been what Mary is singing about. And that word mercy comes from the Greek for mercy, but underneath that is the Hebrew word for love. His love, God's love, extends to those who fear him from generation to generation. His love will never end. This is the kind of love that Mary sings about. Love is an overused word. I've done the love sermon a number of times, and it's hard to think of something unique and creative to say. We all know that the English word love has watered down its meaning. I love Indian food, so that's good news for me today, but that's not the same kind of love. In the Bible, love is a three-dimensional and rich and beautiful word. Allow me to give you a definition that is much too long for you to remember about what love is like in the Bible. You can bring it up. Biblical love is a promise-keeping loyalty motivated by deep personal care and shown by generous, concrete actions of self-giving service. And who do we see exemplifying this kind of love throughout the Bible? It's God. It's God. Promise-keeping loyalty. You can bring that definition back up again. And I encourage you now, take a moment to look at this definition, which I know is unwieldy and too long. Find a word that resonates with you so that you look at that and you say, that's love. Or that's the love I want to show. Or that's the love I want to receive. What word stands out to you? This is the kind of love that God has shown his people over and over again. Mary sees herself as but one recipient in a long line of generations who have received God's loyal love. She feels this love personally, and yet she sings about it cosmically. We have this idea, there's this idea that you'll find out there, that somehow God wasn't with his people before Jesus. And that yes, when Jesus comes, it starts something new, but there's this idea that God is only starting to be faithful around Jesus. But God has been with his people all along. And Mary finds herself in a story much bigger than her. Across generations, God keeps his promises. And more often than not, he keeps it in surprising ways. You cannot pin or peg God down. He's going to surprise you. The most surprising of all God's miraculous, undeserved demonstrations of biblical love to his people was through the sacrifice of Jesus redeeming humanity. No one expected this. Despite the promises and the prophecies of centuries, no one expected it to look this way. Jesus is the embodiment of the surprising, upside-down, loyal love of God. If you want to know what God is like, you look at Jesus. Jesus is what God is like. And if you have trouble conceptualizing what can sometimes feel like an abstract idea of God, who am I talking to? Who am I asking for help? You can picture Jesus, the embodiment of the concrete, generous, self-giving, loyal love of God. You can see it in Jesus' actions. He served and he welcomed people. He got down and he washed the dirty feet of the disciples, even of the one who betrayed him. He welcomed people to the table. He gathered tax collectors, prostitutes, and sinners, and that was his crew. He loved to welcome them to the table to show what God's love is like. We see this love through Jesus' teachings, the most subversive and revolutionary things anyone has ever said. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Don't let that fall on deaf ears. Jesus' teachings were subversive and revolutionary and have changed the world. We see Jesus' embodiment of the loyal love of God through his death. Self-giving for the sake of love, for the sake of his people, and forgiving, releasing them into freedom. It's all surprising. And if this story sounds too old and too familiar to you, try your best to hear it with fresh eyes. It's one big surprise. The surprise is carried right into the letters of Paul, and here's where it has to do with you. In Ephesians 2, look for the surprises here. As for you, that's you in the room, you were dead in your transgressions, that is your sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. But here's the surprise. Because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, there's the word again, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. It's by grace you have been saved. That's the surprise that includes you in it. That's the surprise that is also baked right into the Christmas story. And though you've heard it in carols and seen it on TV and heard it preached and read the story, look again at the surprising ways that God's upside-down loyal love shows up in the Christmas story. We have an angel of God appearing to Mary, a young, unwed woman in a patriarchal culture where the men are always put first. The men are the legitimate witnesses. The men receive the news. And yet here we have Mary is the first one. She's a backwoods, no-name girl who will become the mother of the king. There is nothing outwardly extraordinary about her, and yet she is the mother of the king. She will conceive in an appearance of scandal, putting God's whole plan at risk. Mary is at threat of death if people find out that she's pregnant outside of marriage. The king of the universe is put in a feeding trough on the outskirts of town where no one notices, where the animals slobber and lick and probably have to be shooed away a little bit. The most unhygienic and dirty place you can imagine putting a baby, God forbid. And the first people to witness this, young, kid, poor shepherds on the outside of town in the middle of the night that no one gives a second thought to. They are the first witnesses to Jesus' arrival. Surprise after surprise. Why would God do it this way? Why not keep it safe? Make a good imperial announcement. Overthrow the bad guys right off the bat. I don't know. But I imagine that God does it this way because this is the way that God has always done it. This is the way God works. He surprises us to show his love to the world and show his love particularly to the marginalized, to the poor, to those who are ashamed and scandalized, to the young, to women, to the outsiders. That's what God's love is like. That's how God turns the world upside down. And while we tend to think of God in only masculine terms because of the language of most of the Bible, because of the patriarchal culture and history that has evolved over time, we do find in this story that a mother's love is at the very heart of who God is. We have a mother full of love for her unborn child and full of love for God, and those are woven into one. And if you want to understand what God is like, if you want to imagine what the God of Bible is like, you can't do so without also imagining what love is like. You can't try to picture God without thinking and asking, what is love? A mother's love is one of the most profound examples of this. Mary, as a mother, makes a sacrifice to carry this child, to birth it, to raise him, and then to release him. She gives her full self to this, growing the child, feeding him, comforting, holding, nursing, loving. And Mary's mother love shows us something important about what God is like. God is called the Father more often, but there are many images of God as a loving mother in the Old Testament as well. He carries, births, raises, and releases Jesus. And he does the same to us. And if you want to grapple, if you want to understand God's love, you will also come to the conclusion of who you are. See, a mother gives names to her children. I'm not just talking about the name that they're born with, but all sorts of special nicknames of love and care, nicknames that she hopes will sink down into her children's bones until they internalize it and fully believe just how loved they are by their mother. I have a children's Bible at home that I just got, and it says that there are 3 names that God gives us that he's particularly fond of. Names that he hopes will sink deep down into our bones until we actually live them out. 3 names that God gives us. Belonging, beloved, delightful. The names that God gives you. Belonging. God says, you belong with me. No matter how lost or lonely you feel, no matter if you're an outsider in society, you belong here with me. There's a place for you with God. He gives us the name beloved. He says, you're loved so thoroughly, it becomes who you are. May we live this out. A child of God, beloved. He gives us the name delightful. You make God happy just by being you. It almost sounds scandalous, but I believe it's true. We don't need to earn God's delight or hide when we make mistakes. We just have to trust that God says we do belong and says we are beloved and that we are delightful. And while the love from God is unconditional and poured out, trusting that And trusting God is a key to receiving that love. Because though the love may be lavished on us, we can choose not to receive it. Love is powerful. Love is transformative. But we can block our eyes and our ears and our heart to it. One of my favorite authors, Frederick Buechner, says this about love. Of all the forces in the world, love is the most powerful and the most powerless. It is the most powerful because it alone can conquer the final and most impregnable stronghold, which is the human heart. But it is the most powerless because it can do nothing except by consent. God calls to us. He woos us. He asks us to open the door, to pay attention. May we have eyes to see. If there's two encouragements for you today, it's number one, to have those eyes that are open, to look for the surprising signs of God's love all around you. My personal philosophy is that God drops little hints and clues all around you in your everyday life, if only you could see them. I'll just tell you some of the ways that I've noticed God's love this past week. I was at a funeral on Friday for Roy Harvey. And I find Sam up here, the son-in-law of Roy. And what does he call his father-in-law? His father in love. And who is Sam to Roy? His son in love. That's a beautiful picture between a son-in-law and a father-in-law. It's not always the case, is it? When I think of biblical love, I think of loyal, promise-keeping, serving love. From generation to generation, year after year, that's what God is like, and we see that in family relationships like this. I see it in the lunch being served after the service today. We're truthfully a quite diverse group of people, all different languages from all corners and pockets of India. They come together in unity to do what? To serve and to feed and to welcome you. This is love. I see it in a story from a number of years ago where I was alone in this building and it was snowing and cold outside. And, I often have the job of putting the words on the sign, that gaudy black sign with the neon letters. And I was like, what am I going to do this year? A number of Christmases ago. Oh, I know. This is creative. Hope, peace, joy, and love. So I just put those words on the sign. Not too long passes. Someone walks into the building, looks for any live human, finds me in my office, and says, "Hi, I was walking by and I saw that sign, and I think I need some of that. I think I need hope, peace, joy, and love. What can you do for me?" This is a real story. And for a number of months, this person became woven into the community. I don't think they ever came on a Sunday, maybe I'm wrong, but became deeply intertwined with people who showed him the hope, peace, joy, and love of Christ. This person's situation was unique and unfortunate, where the government of Canada was not going to let them stay in the country for much longer. And behind the scenes, a little fundraiser took place to send them back to Madagascar a couple months later. But I believe that this person was touched by the hope, joy, peace, and love of God in that time. I think of a story not too long ago where, unfortunately, the contents of my freezer at home was completely lost through an accident. And it wasn't just, pizza pockets in there. It was a lot of home-cooked meals that especially my wife had cooked because she was going into medical school again and wanted to kind of stock up the fridge before the school year started, so we kind of set up for success, and we lost everything in the freezer. And honestly, it was devastating. It was very sad. And it was hard not to kind of carry that weight with us for a little bit. But within a week, my wife is all about the deals. Allison loves the points offers and the double flyers or whatever. And we're at Shoppers late at night, sort of a fluke. We had just gone to a cafe with the kids, and it was 9 o'clock at night. We go to a Shoppers, and she's like, "Okay, let me just get a few things, and you can just be with the kids out here." And it's late. I want to go home, and don't have a lot of patience for the deal shopping right now. And she brings a single stick of deodorant to the cash and buys it. And I wasn't looking at what was happening here, But she tells me, please wait a little longer. I said, why? What are you going to do? We don't have a lot of time here. She says, wait. She goes back and buys 100 more sticks of deodorant, women's deodorant, maybe $3 or $4. She doesn't tell me why until we check out. There must have been a mistake, because for every $3 stick of deodorant, you're getting $30 in points. So that's 10 times as much. We're getting hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in points. She says, we're going to all the shoppers in town. And I understood why. And so, Larry Utek, Sackville, all the different places, Bedford. Yeah, and it's there. And at one point I say, okay, I think let's just drop the kids off at home for bedtime and then you can go back out. And we did that, and by the time she goes back out, it's all gone. All the points offers have been changed. It was a glitch in the system. Someone had put an extra zero when they were typing it. All around the country, people were noticing the same thing, and it wasn't online, and we discovered it, and then someone figured out at headquarters and changed it, and it was my fault for saying we should bring the kids home for bed, because then she lost the rest of the points. But guess what we did with all those points? We restocked the freezer, right? This is the same week. And you can listen to the stories like, well, that's a funny story, that's a great coincidence, but listen, I choose to see this story as God's mercy and love for a silly situation that meant something to us, and just God's intervention in our lives. I think, lastly, of the love of a dog. We lost our dog about a week ago. Last Sunday, we had to go home and put our dog down. Cancer and tumors had taken away her quality of life. She was only 4. It's a terrible sadness. If you've had a dog or you know of a dog, I don't have to say any more. What kind of person is always happy to see you when you come home, always wants to be at the door, always wants to hug you, and always thinks the best of you, and never would think that you do anything wrong, despite how annoyed I got at that dog. In all honesty, once we had 2 kids, the dog just became an easy third place and was not receiving the love and attention and care from me like she should. And yet, always so full of the loyal love of, can I say the loyal love of God? In a way, it mirrors that. Look for signs of God's love all around you. Lastly, be a surprising sign of God's love. To show love takes intention. But the truth is, you are surrounded by people in your life that need to feel and experience the love of God, and perhaps you have the opportunity to do so. If you can, I'm looking at the people on the slides back there, if you can bring up that long definition of love that I said about 10 slides ago. Look at this definition and think, again, what word do I need to work on? What word strikes me? What word is God resonating in my heart for the love that he wants me to show to the people around me? Because the love of the Bible is promise-keeping loyalty, motivated by deep personal care and shown by generous, concrete actions of self-giving service. How can you be that? How can you be this way? I started, for the first time in my life, seeing a counselor about a month ago. And it's actually, I'm being surprised at the good that it's doing in my life. But one of the pieces of advice, the one that has stuck with me and made the most impact so far, is the advice to pause. To pause. When you feel frustrated, when you feel impulsive, when you feel the unwanted emotions are creeping into your present moment and trying to take control, the advice is pause. Perhaps take an outside perspective, notice what those emotions are doing, think about them as a separate thing, think how you want to respond, how that moment to be sort of a buffer moment, to pause and to make a commitment. How will I respond? The response we most likely want is to respond in love. This is a high calling, the love of God, but it's possible through the Spirit. It's possible for you in your frustrations and your stress and your difficult family dynamics in this upcoming week. Pause. Ask the Spirit to give you the love you need for the moment. We find ourselves in this moment of pause. We're going to have a busy week in front of us. Probably be seeing you in a couple days again. Pause. Embrace the pause. Notice the weight of the moment, because the orchestra is about to play. That first singer is about to come. All beauty and all joy is about to be released on creation again as we enter the Christmas story. Pause, reflect, make a commitment, look for the love around you, and be that love in the world. Amen.